10 years of data in there for these older age class bucks. And what the bell curve revealed, as you can see, is it's really that, if you're someone who wants to think about taking your rut vacation, is really kind of that top plateau of the bell curve for bucks that showed up in my rut funnels during daylight.
I was like, well, if I throw a mic on, then I can help others the way that these people have all helped me.
Born in the heart of the Pennsylvania deer camp, with the help of experts, friends, and local legends, we bring you valuable knowledge and powerful stories for your hunting adventures. Welcome to the East Meets West Hunt Podcast with your host, Beau Martonik.
All right, we are good to go. Matt Upgren, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Beau, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's exciting to get to talk to you. I've been following along with your YouTube channel for I think quite a while now, and really enjoy the educational stuff that you put out on whitetail hunting and a whole bunch of other stuff, but really around, your channel is called Northern Forest Whitetail. So that really caught my eye when I saw that, because I'm like, I hunt in, big woods, just kind of monotonous timber type areas. And, that just sounded very similar. And a lot of your stuff is surrounded by that, along with some other stuff that you do as well. But do you want to give a little bit of background on yourself and kind of who you are, where you're from?
Yeah, you bet. So as you mentioned, Matt Upgren, my channel is Northern Forest Whitetail, but I live up in northern Minnesota, up in the north central part of the state. Been deer hunting since I legally could. Before that, got started hunting by duck hunting, actually, and that's where I sort of, my passion for hunting began, but, turned more into whitetails. But, we do some hunting around here where my home is, but honestly, my heart is kind of up in the northeastern part of the state, up in that big woods, public land type setting, really just vast, unbroken forests of intermixed with clear cuts, big mature stands of aspen and balsam, beaver ponds, things like that. That's the kind of cover we're in up in northeastern Minnesota. We're kind of on the western side of the Arrowhead region for folks that are familiar with that. But that's really where my passion lies in whitetail hunting, is in that type of area, that big woods setting. Although I do dabble in some other, more mixed ag type areas closer to home, but that's where I do my gun hunting and my rut hunting, and have been for many years.
Nice. What is the terrain like in that type of area? Do you have hills or some sort? Or is it kind of flat?
It's fairly flat. There's a little bit of rolling topography, but for the most part, we're kind of on the edge of some really big bog regions up in, you get north of like Red Lake reservation area, and even to the north, there's really large swamp systems. We're kind of on the southern fringe of that, and so it's real kind of gentle, flat with gentle rolling. I mean, they say some of the biggest popple trees or aspen in the country grow in this area, and so there's some really cool aspen forests in there. Logging's really big. Popple logging's a big industry in this area, so the landscape is really unbroken. You'll go a couple, 2-3 miles without crossing a road, longer in some cases, more miles. Just rolling kind of terrain of beaver swamps, flowages. Beaver will dam up rivers and creeks, and you'll get this kind of big swamp system, and mixed with mature forest and clear cuts.
Oh, nice. So it sounds like at least there's like a bunch of different like vegetation edges and things that help a little bit, because I've always said that I struggle the most deer hunting flatter terrain than I do like when I'm hunting the mountains or hill country, just because the topography helps a little bit with dictating deer movement when you have these big vast forests. But in some of the areas I do hunt that are flatter, I'm always looking for trying to find those habitat edges.
For sure. One thing that we found really funnels the deer well are those beaver ponds that I talk about. A lot of creeks and things like that. So, you could find an area where, say, they logged a quarter section of woods, and maybe there's a big swamp complex on one side of it, and maybe it's a big oxbow of a river on the other side, and to the south there's a middle-aged clear cut, maybe 8, 9, 10-year-old clear cut, and deer will be traveling back and forth in the hourglass between the swamp complexes, if there's some high ground in between connecting these clear cuts. And most of the land has been cut over. Of course, it was in the late 1800s, early 1900s, the whole state was cut over. But since then, the next round of logging has occurred. So a lot of it is just varying age, aspen regen. But it's interesting, you'll get into some clear cuts that have the sign in it, that have the trails, the droppings, and it'll be evident which ones the deer are in. It's not like just throw a dart at the map and pick any one of the clear cuts you want. They're all the same. We found some are hot and some are not, and you'll see the sign. It'll be evident which ones the deer are using, the rubs, the tracks, all that kind of stuff. So that's one of the things that we've keyed in on for both as a food source for deer, but also as a funneling mechanism where those sort of doe zones or doe family groups are summering and spending their time in the fall. Those are kind of the constellation of movement points that bucks will use, hitting those doe family groups and then finding those pinch points in between.
Yeah, and what do you think dictates what clear cuts they use and which ones they don't? Is there something to do with the food or the browse that's within them, or?
Yeah, I think that's first and foremost is just the palatability of the forage. We found that the first year an area is cut over and it's either down to the ground or you get the first year popple regen that comes up. That doesn't seem to have the deer in it as much as, say, a clear cut that's 3 to 6 years old, and that the popple regen is over your head. And a couple of things that because we've pondered this, we've sat around the campfire at deer camp talking about why we think some area in seemingly similar conditions, one will have doe family groups in it, another won't. One theory we have is some clear cuts are a lot cleaner than others, where they'll drag all the trees in one spot with a buncher, and then they'll delimb and everything and cut in one place, so you end up with a real clean forest floor. They seem to like that where we're at, and we think it's because they can escape predators easier. We have a robust timber wolf population in our area, and other clear cuts are really jumbled and jackstrawed, where they're delimbing and things as they go. And it's really hard, even for me, to get through one of those, let alone like a deer trying to run from a timber wolf. So that's one theory. And then, the other is just, I guess, food, cover, water, just kind of those basic needs that the deer are looking for.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I wouldn't have thought of that. Again, not where I'm at. We're not dealing with timber wolves at all, and and they've kind of learned to live with the coyotes and stuff and bears that we have here, unless they're young or weak, that they really have issues with that. But like in our areas, when they do a cutting in places where they're worried about the browse or the new growth starting to be browsed down to where it won't even take off because of the deer feeding on all of it, they'll leave a lot of the tops down and create that jungled mess on purpose, just so that it kind of creates a barrier and makes it harder for them to get into the middle of it. And I mean, most areas it's not a problem because the deer herd's not really high enough to be able to do that. But there are places, especially like large private timber company tracts that they lease out and stuff, where sometimes that the population will get a little bit too high. But for the most part, that's not really the case. But we found in our areas there's certain cuts that they'll prefer based off of the type of trees that are growing. Now we have a pretty diverse type, groups of trees. Now if beech takes off everywhere, which seems to happen a lot, they don't really prefer to browse on that as it's growing up, versus if you got tulip poplar or, some oaks that are regen, things like that they like to browse, in that first, year, 2 years, as you were talking about, where they didn't like with the aspens there, is they're regenning. But and also, do you get blackberry briars at all where you're at?
A lot of raspberry. We don't get the blackberry as much up here, but I gotta think it's similar.
Yeah, they seem to love browsing on that stuff here, at least.
Here, yep.
Yeah. No, that's and also, you mentioned beaver ponds. That's like, man, that's one of my favorite things to be able to hunt. And it's, I was actually I just went scouting with a buddy of mine the other day that was asking me, wanted me to come out and look, because I talk about beaver ponds all the time, and it was like, hey, could you come look at these beaver ponds? And I just love them, like you said, because they do funnel movement down. Like it's a really good way to be able to funnel that movement. And so you were saying that, like, say a lot of times, if your ideal situation be, say, a cut down below it and then maybe a swamp up above it that leads in that beaver pond, and then using that as kind of like funnels, as far as how would you describe that, I guess, a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, so for more context, we're hunting deer populations that are anywhere from, according to the DNR here, 0 to 12 deer per square mile. We think there's a little bit more than, they're kind of grouped up in certain areas more than others. So it's really low deer population in general. That can be a drawback in the sense that you don't get to see very many deer, and it can be kind of boring, hunting in the big woods at times. And but it can also be a good thing in that those bucks during the rut have to go farther and pound out more miles searching for does than they would in, like, say, a food plot context in a semi-urban, situation. But so I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of sense of what you were up against, and it sounds similar to, locales that you hunt. So our strategy is, okay, given the low deer numbers, given that we're trying to pursue a buck that's in the middle of nowhere, this vast forested region, he could literally be anywhere. I mean, it could truly be a needle in a haystack, and really can kind of mess with your mental psyche throughout the fall, not seeing deer. But our strategy and what I've done and had success with is try to find those doe family groups or doe zones, and then try to connect those dots. And oftentimes that's a clear cut up here, say to the north. Kind of getting back to your question, a clear cut, let's say it's got a lot of trails in it, there's fresh tracks, maybe a couple rubs in it that we're scouting in October. We can see, okay, deer are in here and using this clear cut. And then picture one down to the south, a varying age, middle age aspen regen cut over. Same thing, we're finding some beds and trails mainly, and fresh droppings are probably one of the best indicators. And then what we'll do is look for that funneling feature somehow in between point A and point B. And oftentimes it's that beaver pond that's sort of situated semi in between, or a wet swamp of some sort. Maybe it's a vast, like, tamarack stretch of just devoid of diversity, and deer don't even go in there, So we'll use those type of wet, low, swampy features that you get on that fringe, on that edge between that point A and point B, those doe zones. And if you get on that fringe of the funneling feature, say the wet or the swamp, you can find kind of transition zones where it's like yellow swamp grass moving up into an ash swale and then moving up into more, cover. You'll see those trails through the yellow swamp grass kind of going around the swamp or the beaver pond. Oftentimes those beaver will be logging, on the edges of it. And it kind of creates this semi-open, like, transition zone. And I don't have any data to prove this, but it just seems like deer like that. I've got the trail camera photos back it up, and the trails are there. It just seems like they like that kind of transitioning cover from the vast mature forest down into the swamp. They're in that transition zone going from point A to point B. So, that's a pretty common setup where we're at. And we do have the luxury of ash swales. So they say there's a beetle that they say are going to kill them all in Minnesota someday, but they're not here yet. And so we still have these ash swales, and that's where it maintains that sort of yellow grass, swampy, kind of semi-open look.
Yeah, I gotcha. And no, I mean, I like that approach where, it's very a simplified approach of like, okay, got to find these doe groups and finding the connect the dots in between them and finding those, whether it's in places that have more hills, those terrain features that kind of funnel them through, or in your situation, finding kind of that really those, that body of water, whether it's beaver pond or the swamps or anything that's dictating their movement to have to go a certain way and be able to move around it. So, that makes a whole lot of sense. And so when, or I guess we'll get into the when here in a minute, but, what is your typical, like, do you have gun season during the rut typically, or is it bow season during that time?
Yeah, good question. So we actually have our firearms, so center fire rifle season during the peak of the rut. Our rifle season always runs from, it varies each year, but it's always that somewhere in that first week in November through the third week in November. We get 2 full weeks for firearms season up here. The southern part of the state, or southern 2/3, really only gets 1 week and 2 weekends, but we get 2 full weeks and 3 weekends. So we're lucky that we get to use rifles that long. It'd be a long season up there if it was archery only during the rut.
Yeah. How much has the timber wolves affected the population?
They've definitely had an impact. I'm 35 years old, so my datum or my baseline isn't that long in comparison to say my dad's or other guys, but there's an old timer who a family friend, and he's hunted this area we're in for years. He hunted back up in this area in the 70s, and he said he could count 100 deer driving a particular stretch a mile before the wolves recovered. So back in the 70s, the wolves were still, much, much fewer in numbers than they are today. And, today if you drive that same stretch of highway, you won't see a single deer in the ditches just randomly feeding. And so they've had a really big impact. There's kind of controversy over what's actually causing the deer decline. Me just being honest with you, I think the wolves have had a huge impact, more than a lot of folks let on, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. I mean, that's anyone that I've talked to from that region, or people that reach out that listen to the podcast or whatever, say that they always tell me you're lucky you don't have to deal with wolves. And, I'm not anti, wolves by any means, but at the same time, if they are, unregulated there, that can cause problems, especially on, deer and things that really don't have any way of being able to fight back, or at least at the beginning, especially when they weren't used to those numbers of wolves. They just didn't, even expect that kind of danger. I've seen that out west, like when they've reintroduced them to Idaho and some of those other places where what it's done to the elk populations and the deer numbers, it's pretty crazy what they can do.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'm the same. I think they are very cool animals. It's neat having some around, but they got to be managed, like you say. I mean, we have bear season. We manage every other big game species. Should be no different for wolves, but it is what it is. It's kind of depressing if you dwell on it too much, but we try not to. And you kind of got to keep a positive mentality. And so at camp, of course, we talk about it, and you just got to try to find a way with the situation you got and just overcome somehow. And that's, hunting in the big woods, you probably feel this, and it does take kind of a special person to be interested in it, especially when you see on YouTube the 80 acres of private land in the Midwest, and it's unbelievable. And I want that too, but yeah. There is an allure of the big woods, the remote public land, big woods settings that it does kind of get in your blood a little bit, though, and there's something about just, harvesting a big chocolate-horned, mature Northwoods buck that's so rewarding. And, when you are back in these remote places, whether it's where I'm at or you guys out in Pennsylvania, I mean, there's something really rewarding about a remote public land hunt where you get it done, versus some other settings. And you gotta be mentally prepared for a season in the big woods, because it can it can break you as a hunter. I mean, you can have a tough run and not see a deer for a few days straight, and it can, if you're not ready for that, it can, I've seen some good men, get, not, have bad seasons and it can really affect a guy. So
Oh yeah.
you got to be ready for it.
Yeah, I'd be lying if I didn't say that it crosses my mind many times, just about a couple times every season of like, what am I doing? Could I, should I be driving a few hours away and hunting, some higher deer populations to at least see some deer at times?
Exactly.
But for some reason I keep going back and just, I don't know. I love it. And it's funny. Everyone I talk to that does love to hunt that way it's the same thing. It's just like you're doing it more so for that experience and just being able to be in those remote places that are just so cool to be able to see versus, just about shooting the deer.
Exactly. Yep. Bingo. That's, it can be hard, like you say. I mean, you'll go on social media and you're seeing big bucks on Trade Buddy, getting this one on camera, this and that. Here you are out in the, the pine forest somewhere, not seeing anything. But no, that's just it. It's the beauty of it. It's the remoteness and just the solitude. It really is. It really is an experience unlike any other. And then when you do have that encounter and a buck emerges out of this, just days you're in sitting in this big wood setting. I mean, it's just a surreal experience, when it finally does happen.
Oh yeah. 100%. And it can allow deer to get old and be able to find those just like old age class of deer. Do you find that where you're at too?
For sure. Yeah. That's something that we talk about that we're so grateful for. I mean,
yeah,
it's easy to get sucked into the high deer density areas or want to do that, but that is one of the really bright spots of a big woods remote setting, is that although there are few in number, we see the age class is much better. Even the buck to doe ratio, we would say, is about 50-50. I mean, about every other deer you see is probably going to have antlers on its head from the deer stand. And we've been fortunate to take some really nice bucks at our camp over the years. 200-pound field dressed weight is a very real expectation. They surpass 200 pounds dressed out, frequently in our area, and we're just that's definitely a bright spot. It's just these gnarly, big woods bucks. It's just amazing to think they're living out there in the summertime, in the heat and the deer flies and the mosquitoes, and here they are in the fall, they emerge out of the woods. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah. I was at an event up in upstate New York a couple weekends ago, and I was talking to a legendary tracker from Maine, Landy Benoit, and he was telling me, he was just stopping by, I was talking with me, and I was like, so I said, you've been, all over, like, where's some place that you want to go that you've never, tracked before? And he's like, northern Minnesota.
No
he's
kidding.
like, that's, yeah. He was like, he's like the allure of just the, the nothingness. They're just like the just vastness of it. He's like, that's something that, that he's almost 80 years old, and he said he wants to make it happen. So it was pretty cool to be able to hear that. But it made me think of that when you were talking about 200 pounders, because that's like, that's the measurement of scale, especially in the Northeast. But, hearing you say that, sounds like you guys use that as a measurement tool as well.
Yep. We don't get real wound up about antler scoring. Like, I don't think we've ever even scored one of our bucks up at our cabin. For us, it's weight, and that talks to us about the maturity of the buck. And you crack that 200-pound line, and you really got something there. And it happens, like I say, just about every year. We got one hanging on the meat pole that's 200 pounds, 205, 210, something like that. Of course, we shoot some that are smaller than that too, but that's our measurement for sure. Not the antler score. So.
Yeah, and I will get into the some of the details here, what we're going to talk about. But I have to ask you about, because you mentioned a couple times about camp. So what's your deer camp like? As you can see with my hat that says "Make Deer Camp Great Again," like I'm.
Oh, that's awesome! Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I didn't see that on your hat, but I love that. I really think that's so important. Our camp is a really cool. It's a shack that my dad and a couple of his friends built about 30 years ago. It's just a little 40 acres of private land, but it's 2.5 miles in off the highway, and this is a highway that sees almost no traffic throughout the day, so it's a real remote area. But we park our pickups at the landing, we call it, at the highway, and we load up the otter sleds with all our gear and bullets and a couple cases of beer, and we head in and on the four-wheelers, and it's a 2.5 mile ride into the cabin itself. And then from there, we all have kind of different areas we all hunt, and then we hike on foot from the cabin itself. We go out on foot another half mile to a mile from there to our deer stands when we hunt. So, before that, my dad hunted this area 20 years before the cabin was built, and they actually used a wall tent, which is kind of crazy. So he's been in this area for years, and we've had the cabin for almost 30 years now. So he always says we got it easy now. He's like, you guys don't know, there'll be snow on the ground. It gets cold up here during November, and we got a big wood stove in there, and it's toasty and warm. But it's a really cool camp. We have some family friends that have been coming up there with us for years, and some folks have drifted away, unfortunately, which I think is kind of natural too. As you get older and families grow, people tend to do their own things, so that's natural. But there's still kind of that core group that still goes there, and we go there for several nights, and we all got rifles, and we sit around the campfire when we get in at dark, and we tell deer hunting stories, and we talk about everything in life, and it's just a really, really cool experience up there. And when you do get one on the pole, when you get a buck on the pole, I mean, you're the hero in camp, and
Yeah.
we all tell stories when we get in for the day, and we always ask each other, do you got a story? And if you say yeah, that means you saw a deer, even if it was a doe. That's what we're all waiting on. And so it's a fun experience up there, though. Wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That sounds like the absolute dream deer camp, like a remote one you have to take ATVs back into, and just like you're just away from everything, and like being able to walk out your door and go hunt, like that is the dream when it comes to a deer camp. And I love seeing that in different places. Like the deer camp culture is super strong in Pennsylvania and in some states, but it's not strong everywhere. Like I've brought in friends from other states and stuff and got to experience our deer camp, and they always are like, you don't know what you have. Like this is so special. Like all your family gets together basically from October through December, and whether it's on the weekends or if you go up during the rut vacation, and like all these different things to spend time there. Like it's really cool. And ours is not that remote as far as like if someone gets a buck down, there's texts that are going out, and then all of a sudden there's 50 people at camp, that are coming to look at it, and it's pretty cool in that respect as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's so important, deer camp.
Yeah.
That keeps the focus, in my opinion, where it really should be, and it's about the experience, spending time with family, and we trying to worry less about social media or whatever that is, or that kind of side of it. We try to limit that part of it if we can, and just focus on us in camp, being there and enjoying it. So. And that's really, I think, kind of what led me down this road of being so passionate about whitetail hunting too, was my experiences in my youth with my dad bringing me duck hunting and whitetail hunting at camp with the guys, it was with my cousins and my uncles, and that really imprinted on me, and I want to do that for my kids, and I feel lucky that I was able to get introduced hunting that way. Not everyone is, and so I just think that makes hunters that last, that having a deer camp, it's just that important in my mind.
Oh, it truly is. And I like the way you put it. You're so lucky to be able to have that, and I feel the same way because others that don't have that or don't have that experience, like I hope that at some point they have the ability to be able to meet someone that invites them to their deer camp or eventually purchase their own or whatever it is, just to be able to experience it, because it's a lot of fun, and it's just nice to be able to come back at the end of the day, tell stories, talk about game plans, and embellish old stories that every time they get a little bit better, and it's a good time.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyways, I wanted to talk to you about, and on your YouTube channel there was 2 videos specifically, which I know you have more on this topic as well, but where everything that you just said about like where you hunt, low deer densities, deer can be anywhere in this vast landscape, trying to put the odds in your favor. Seems like you're a pretty analytical guy, and you've taken trail camera data and plotted them basically to try to find the peak daylight movement times, as well as the times of the day that they're moving there. But to kind of give a little bit of a background, I guess, if you would, on how you came up with that, or what have you found from looking at 10 years of, or over 10 years of data at this point?
You bet, yeah. So it kind of started out with just me running trail cameras and enjoying, taking inventory and seeing these bucks, and I would save all of my photos every year. And I would always run them, we could make a trip up in early fall, say late September, early October, and we'd put the cameras out, we'd let them run all the way till we get back up there around Thanksgiving or something. But so I had all of this archived data each year for a few years, and I'm a civil engineer by trade, and so I'm kind of a numbers person anyways, and I'm always looking at ways I can analyze something mathematically to tip something in my favor. And it just kind of hit me one day. I was like, so I work a 40-hour work week. I work for the man, if you will, and so you got to take vacation, right? So I was always trying to figure out, well, what day should I take off? I'm talking with my buddies, and they're gonna start in late October. This guy's gonna start mid-November, and so I'm like, well, why don't I just start plotting all of these sightings of bucks on an Excel graph? But I thought, not just any bucks. I want to, I'm after an older age class buck if we can find one. Not that antlers are everything, but I'd be lying if I say I didn't like shooting big bucks. And then after those. So I said, okay, I'm going to take out all the photos of does and all the photos of spikes, or what I believe is a yearling buck, and just get rid of those. And I'm only going to focus on those bucks that I think are 2 years old or older. So is it an exact science? No, I could be wrong, on a couple instances, but basically any type of 8-point rack or bigger, even if I can determine it's a 2-year-old from the size of the body or something like that. But then I even took it a step further, and I said, I'm also not really that worried about nighttime photos, because that doesn't do me much good, because I can't be on the deer stand at night. So I got rid of all the nighttime photos, and I boiled these trail cam photos that I had archived over the years down to just the older age class bucks during the daylight. When are they showing up in my rut funnels? And so just to be clear for folks watching this, these are only photos from what I would consider a rut funnel, meaning the areas we talked about earlier, in this discussion. Any photos that I had from, we have some private land closer to home if we do food plots or things like that, didn't look at any of those photos. This is only those remote, big woods, wilderness setting, rut funnel pictures. And a few years into it, I started plotting it. And then every year after that, I just added the next year's data in, and it refined that bell curve clearer and clearer over the years, and now I've been going on, I think it's like 11 years now. I'm gonna do a video with the latest from my 2023 photos, but anyways, there's 10 years of data in there for these older age class bucks, and what the bell curve revealed, as you can see, is it's really that, if you're someone who wants to think about taking your rut vacation, that November 1st through November 7th or 8th is really kind of that top plateau of the bell curve for bucks that showed up in my rut funnels during daylight, the older age class bucks. Couple caveats with this. So I'll start with the days of the month, and then I'll talk about the times of the day. But
Yep.
You got to be a little bit careful with this data, the chart that you're seeing. And the reason for that is it tends to drop off. If you look on the right side, meaning like November 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, it sort of drops off. The bars, on the tail of the bell curve drops off a lot faster than the other side leading up to it in October. And I've pondered why that is, because I'm like, those aren't bad days to be on stand. And what I believe is happening with this data set is the way I have my trail cameras set up is, this is going back 10 years. So the delay and trigger speed wasn't as good back then. I had longer delays set on my cameras. So what would happen is as bucks begin to transition from the seeking phase of the rut where they're alone, as they start to encounter and come into contact with receptive does and they're on a doe, as they move through my rut funnel, the doe is triggering the camera photo first. And there may be a buck behind her 5 to 60 seconds later, but I never got a picture of him. So that's my theory as to why that data set drops off so hard. So take all this, in the full picture. If you're looking at this, trying to, use it somehow, just understand, the shortcomings of the study, but then use it to your advantage. So how I've used this to my advantage is this tells me that, leading up to in late October and then that November 1st through the 5th, say, that's the buck alone traveling through the woods, tripping that camera, right? And so that tells me, okay, maybe I want to focus on those days in the areas where I think I'll encounter a lone seeking buck, a primary scrape, one of my rut funnels between doe family groups. And then as that bell curve really starts to fall off a table of November 11th, 12th, 13th, maybe I pick stand locations that have higher doe densities around. Maybe I'm in the doe family group or what I believe is more of a doe zone on those later dates. So that's kind of how I think about this data and how I try to use it, in picking stands and when I'm using my vacation.
Yeah, no, heck, you answered a lot of the questions I had without me even asking them. But like that, what you were talking about with the specific doe groups, that makes sense for that later time when you're finding that they're with the does more versus, being in between and, of like, okay, maybe it's going to take a while before something actually comes through here. And, versus where if you're around those doe groups and you happen to pick the right group of, when they're going to be there, the bucks will hang around there a little bit longer versus flying by on the tail of a deer through that, funnel and not even being able to get a shot.
Yeah. It's big woods, and this is kind of where my head's at as far as trying to tip something in my favor. Again, going back to, we just try to find ways to get rid of the needle in the haystack conundrum, and, assuming you're doing everything else right, meaning you're finding good stands to hunt, for example, a primary scrape that's getting usage, maybe a trail, a funnel that's got fresh sign in it. Assuming you're finding good places to hunt, you're being semi-conscious about your wind direction and your entry and exit. Assuming you're doing all the other things right, I'm like, what's the only other thing you can control, to try to tip something in your favor? And to me, that's when you're sitting on stand and time on stand. And so that was kind of the thought process behind this chart. And just to give viewers a sense too, so our approach is we're in an elevated tree stand, like ladder stands, and that is our primary approach. In fact, we just exclusively do that. So we're not seeking out certain buck sign and trying to figure out where he beds per se, and then set up on his bed. I know that's a strategy out there, and that works really well. But We don't do that where we're at. Not saying it makes us right or wrong. It's just our style or strategy is we sit in the elevated stand on a funnel and wait for them to come by.
Yeah. No, I mean, and especially when you're hunting like the time periods you're talking about there during the rut, I mean, that makes a whole lot of sense as far as doing that. And so what was I was curious about when one of the things. So I'm looking at your data. I have it here on my other screen, but you have a peak, and I'll put a screen overlay here for anybody that's watching, but you have a peak in middle of October too. Like, as far as the bell curve, there's, the traditional bell curve in that, first week in November is when it peaks. But when you look at, that October, really from like the 13th to the 20th, you kind of have with like the 15th or the 16th being the largest amount of observed daylight buck pictures. So you see a kind of a peak there. What are you thinking is going on at that point?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, we've pondered that, and remarkably, you always think of the rut as kind of that golden time, and it is, and that's where my mind tends to go, and I think a lot of people is like you got to be out there that first week. But I have gotten really big bucks, like old age class bucks, on camera in the daylight in that timeline that you're talking about. That even that kind of 2/3 of the way through October, like it would surprise you. Those mature deer, I'm talking 3, 4, 5-year-old bucks. What we believe, when they are topping 200 pounds, they're probably up in the 4 or 5-year-old range. We get them on their feet in daylight in late October. What's going on there? I mean, I think that's just starting it. They're starting to try to seek out those doe family groups. One thing that we notice is we won't get the same buck just over and over and over, like right in the same spot on the same scrape, all fall. We will get bucks that come back, every, throughout the fall. But what I think is going on when you first see that spike in October is those bucks start to go on their first, I've called it a gypsy tour, where they just kind of go cross country and they just up and leave their summer range, and they make a huge loop to try to just see what's out there in the countryside. And I think that's what is shown there in the data is it's the first time they're starting to get out. They're trying to locate those doe family groups. It doesn't mean they're going to hang up there and stop. It just means they're doing a huge loop to try to locate them all. And they're going to keep doing that until they hit the first estrus doe.
Yeah, no, that makes a whole lot of sense. I mean, we see it here too, where you especially get a cold front in those windows that you're talking about there. It seems like it's like the peak time when they're hitting scrapes and checking like near doe groups, and all of a sudden a buck will show up that you haven't seen all season yet in daylight, and there's a short windows of time that it's really difficult to be able to predict from a standpoint of taking off work or doing whatever. But really, if I see a cold front sometime in that middle of October time frame, it's like I want to be out in the woods if I can to be able to hit that, because I did something similar with inspired by you with the data that I had and put it together, and I saw very, very similar trends. Same thing, that bump that comes up there in the middle of October, and then as you get in November, kind of the same thing, but actually a little bit more of like, I saw a little bit of a bump in my bell curve. Actually, I'll share the screen and show it with you here just while we're talking about it. So I did it. This is just November that you're going to look at here. I got to go back to the screen, but October is, pretty slow. Now I will say like the first week of October is a little bit higher, but that's a little bit, when you're talking about rut funnels, these aren't really rut funnel type photos. That's more of around if there was acorns or apple trees or known buck bedding close to that kind of stuff. That's where that intel has kind of come from. And then as you start to get a little bit more here in that middle part of October, and then it comes back down and then peaks up, towards the end of October. And I did it, and I did bucks that I figured were 2 years old, kind of what you were talking about, and then also what I would consider 4 years old plus, the red lines that are obviously a lot smaller there. But then as you get in November, November 2nd was by far the best date. But now I only did 4 years of data that I compiled. I have about 15 from trail camera data, but that's about as much time as that. As you know, it takes a lot of time to go through that stuff. So that's what I put together there. And there is one outlier with this November 2nd in 2020. There was a snowstorm that came through the night before, and it just like all the scrapes opened up in some of those areas, and there was just a lot more movement on that day, specifically in 2020, that made it, quite a bit more. But
yeah,
and then also it just seems like this, November 7th through the 16th is a period that honestly is overlooked by a lot of people in our area of a good time for those types of bucks to be able to move. And then even when you look at the mature, the extra mature bucks, if you want to call it, the 4.5-year-old type deer, that number is getting closer to the other blue lines later in that November time frame. And I see that in the end of October. And then again, and this is just my opinion with it, but I believe that a lot of times those really old deer, just like the does, kind of come to them at the beginning, and they don't have to really go out and search. They can kind of take their picking at the beginning. They get locked down for a little while, and then they're out searching, in that middle of the month time frame, when I seem to see the biggest of the big on my cameras in that 11th through the 16th period there. So that's just what I've seen there a little bit.
I've seen that reveal itself, just what you said, where you see some of the absolute slammers on their feet in daylight in that middle of November, almost when you're kind of coming down.
Yep.
I've seen that a lot more in other areas where I've hunted, say near food plots or in mixed ag or semi-residential, semi-rural. You see the real big ones show up as, right, I think it's what you're saying, that the easy pickings you start with, and then when most of the does have been bred, they're going to go and try to find the last one, even if it means risking visibility at times.
Yeah, I've just seen that the 2 and 3 year olds are running ragged that first, especially the first few days in November in that time frame, and you can still kill a really old deer during that time frame, don't get me wrong, but it seems like then that later part, it's even worse as far as seeing deer. It seems like you're just all alone out there, but you have a chance of that roamer coming through in that later part of just kind of breaking away, looking for some of those does, and that was really interesting to me. And also my data was showing that the end of November it jumped up, but that's also right when our gun season comes in. So there's a lot more people in the woods at that time, and I've kind of found areas where the deer like to hole up to get away from that gun pressure. So it'll be like that area is almost vacant most of the year, and 2 days before gun season, these bucks move in, and there'll be 5 or 6 bucks living on this side hill. That's just that's their safe zone to be able to have. And it's it's repeatable every year. It seems I run a lot of my cameras on video mode, and the one time I had this, it was probably a 6 or 7 year old deer, maybe even older, that was hitting a scrape at noon and was just working it, and you can hear gunshots in the background.
Really?
Which is, yeah, it wasn't close, but you can hear it on the audio and the trail camera, and he seemed completely unbothered, which was really funny to me.
That's
but
fun.
yeah.
So one thing that we've seen get deer on their feet, I mean, we're talking about what days, and things, and I agree wholeheartedly with everything you're saying, and that's where that chart I was showing you earlier before we looked at your data, be cautious of that. It doesn't mean mid-November is a bad time to hunt because the bell curve not at all. But one thing that we have seen get deer on their feet that doesn't get talked about as much, when we talk about weather, I love, and everyone online talks about the cold front, right? And I agree. I've shot a handful of really nice bucks during a classic cold front and got them on their feet earlier in the day. But one weather event that we see really move bucks is when that storm is coming in. Let's say it's November and we get snow up here. So let's say you got that, whether it be rain or in our case snow coming in, like the big front is making its way, and you got the warm air here now, and maybe it's like a light rain, like a drizzly rain, but that front is really coming in, and then there's like cold air and high winds coming in for the next 2 days behind it. That warm, kind of drizzly, rainy day in front of the front, we've seen bucks just go nuts those days, and we think they're trying to find does, going out of their way and covering even more miles and covering more ground to find that doe to lock down with her for when the front sets in and the cold wind comes in. He can be with her bedded down during the rut and not out searching. And maybe we're overthinking it, but that's something I don't hear get talked about by any of the folks you listen to on YouTube or wherever you get your content. But that's something that absolutely, like, I would defend that any day of the week, that we absolutely see elevated buck movement that day right as the front is setting in and the temperatures are falling. Like the day that you got falling temperatures and it's transitioning over to snow, you have to be on the stand those days during the rut, I mean, in our opinion.
Yeah, no, and I would 100% agree. And then even on the back end, like at least for what I see is on the back end, like usually the day of like a major front, and either way, sometimes it causes those deer to go in almost like shock. Like they just like, I used to take off work, like the day it would be like, oh, we're getting all the snow and all this stuff, and I'd be out there and you might see some deer, but it was like always that day after that I go back to work, and it would be like there was just, then it was like kind of opened up too, where you'd see like, okay, the snow covered up the scrapes, they want to uncover them, or rain event or whatever it is. And it's just like, and I was talking to someone else that saw, and I have to pay attention to that more as far as the before the front, but someone else I was talking to, that a buddy of mine said the same thing on that he really loves hunting those days before the front more so than any other time, as it's leading up to it. And sometimes it doesn't even feel that cold yet. It's not like, it's not really that much of a change, but you just feel something in the air, like it's about to change. Like you said, maybe a little bit of drizzle or something else.
Yeah. And those are like the classic days when it starts out as like drizzle in the morning, rain when you go out hunting, and it's changing over to kind of sleet and snow. Like that's the day. And then we see it the next morning too. I mean, I've got trail camera photos of bucks ripping open scrapes in falling snow, and it's actually really cool. Like at night, throwing the dirt, and you can see like the falling snowflakes in the photo frame. And so that weather just does something and gets them out there, gets them moving. And I don't think there's a bad day to be on stand if it's the day it's happening, as the temperatures are diving and the front is actually setting in. The following morning, kind of like the cold, air behind it. If it's a crispy, frosty morning or snow on the ground, I mean, if you're on stand those days, I mean, you're putting everything in your favor to have that encounter.
Yo, yeah, and going back, talking about your data that you were discussing there, I think. That data, when I look at it, I think it's extremely good data, and I think it's up to the person and the same thing with my data, like it's up to the person and what your goals are and how you use that data. You know what I mean? It's like, if you're looking for an opportunity standpoint, it's like follow that to the T. It's like, that's what you're looking for. If you're after a certain type of deer or a certain age class, they do kind of whatever they want. So then you just need to figure out how to get 2 weeks off at that point.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's kind of how you look at it and figure out what you're looking to have that experience when you're looking at data. And that's, like for example, I have trail camera data for the last like 8 or 9 years, but it's not, I never did it in this respect. I always did it with bucks that I was like, I would get on camera that caught my interest, and then I would log, I call it a buck ID. So I'd find some way to name it so that it was, that I was recognizable. And then I'd have the dates, I'd have the weather, I'd have historical weather, like any notes that were recordings with it. And I made it where I could filter on and off, like if it was daylight or not daylight. Was it close to daylight? Am I pretty close to where he was? Those types of things, and try to break it down that way. And I was like, I don't know how I could do that with all of my data because it was too much. And then like when I saw your stuff, I was overcomplicating it, where it's like, okay, what are the important things? It's like, when is the daylight and what time is it? And, and if you see certain peaks, you can go back and look at historical weather and see like, okay, what caused that, and be able to figure it out, versus having to do that for every single one, and having, basically paralysis by analysis with data.
Yep. No, spot on. I mean, this is just one set of data, and you got to take the whole picture into account. Like you say, what are your goals and what type of hunting situation are you in? I mean, I know, like I mentioned before, some guys will try to locate sign and focus on one specific buck. This data may not be that helpful, or you might have a whole different metric on when you want to go in for the kill on that one specific buck. Or if you got 40 acres of private land in the Midwest, and you got food plots and ag fields and this, you might have a whole different strategy from just trying to, grind hours on stand. It's a whole different strategy in that scenario versus, the big woods, the low deer density, rut funnel type approach. So yeah, and this is, again, this fits our style, and we're going for, you said, that encounter. That's what we're after, is just trying to tip the odds so that we get that buck coming by. And if he looks like a good, like he's got good shoulders on him, we're fired. we're not any specific buck per se, but
yeah. And then he has a big rack. That's a bonus on it, because like you said earlier, we'd be lying if we said that we don't want to have a big rack on it too.
I want to shoot that big buck for sure, if you can. But I do have a wife and 3 kids now, and she's on me for venison. She's like, Matt, forget about those antlers. We need venison this year. And I'm like, I got, so I can't be too choosy.
Yeah, no, and I think the way that, that you've put together this data is really relevant to 98% of the population, as far as like, okay, you have, hopefully a week off that you can take off during the rut and be able to go hunt. What days are you choosing? Like when are you going to put the odds in your favor the best to be able to come home, hopefully shoot a nice buck for yourself and make the wife happy, or husband, and be able to do that, and it's like to have the best opportunity possible, put it in your favor, and then be able to enjoy deer camp too.
Yep, exactly.
So do you have anything else that you want to add to the, as far as like the dates, anything else that you can think of, or do you want to jump into the times?
Yeah, I think that kind of covers it on the dates. Again, I'll just end with, we said it before, but I'll say it one more time. Don't discount that mid-November just because the bell curve is on the decline. You bring up a very good point that could be when that slammer is out on his feet during daylight. So, just don't discount that. Yeah. Mid part of the month. November.
Definitely. Well, what do you think about, so one other thing that you did was that you had plotted a different chart that went through with, basically by hour, daylight buck movement. And what was interesting to this is there's also a bell curve effect with that as well.
Yeah. So I, when I made that first video with day of the year, it was, it really got a lot of views on YouTube, and it showed me that I wasn't the only one kind of curious about these things or who wanted to see this sort of data. And so I said, well, I could take all these same data points and just to give folks a sense of perspective, it's over 200 photos. So it's not tens of thousands of data points, but it's also not 5. So over 10 years, it's about a little over 20 photos a year that builds these curves, just to give your viewers a sense of the what went into it. But I thought, well, let's take a look at the time of day. And it actually, when we look at the curve on the screen here, it really lined up with kind of what I think I already knew, or what we were targeting anyways for our key times. You can see that it jumps up like around that 8 a.m. time frame, and it just kind of builds throughout the morning, like the sightings, and then all the way up until kind of lunchtime, like noon, and then it sort of drops down. And we've known that for years. Like in our camp, we all say the golden time is that kind of mid-morning through late morning. During the peak of the rut, you got to be on stand, and so that was confirmed there. And then it kind of tapers down a little bit in the afternoon, and then you see that bump in the evening, kind of right before sunset. You do see a little bump come up again in activity. So we found that interesting, and some of the guys at camp are even like, they're in for the day, in the evening, and so you do see that increase right, before dark. The other takeaway from this is looking at these bars that build the curve. There's really not a bad time to be on stand.
No.
We do all day sits, and so we'll try to grind from half hour before dark till an hour before dark. It is a little eerie walking back to camp, after dark, when there was a pack of wolves howling between you and camp, during the day. And so that's a wonder. It's never been too much of an issue, I'll say. But so anyways, we try to grind most of the day. And I think that's one of the takeaways from this graph is that, we've gotten it done at 1:30 in the afternoon. There's your 200-pound buck, that you hunted all fall for, and you needed to be there early afternoon. So again, kind of take it with a grain of salt. These are the peak times, but you also don't want to be sitting on the couch watching TV necessarily at 2 in the afternoon. So
yeah, no, that it's funny when I went through those, when I was going through that data and stuff, I was like, looking for that, that holy grail, like, okay, I can maybe cut some time out of my all day sits, and I was looking at it, I'm like, no. Especially during November, it was like, no, there's just about every hour, it's possible. But I saw literally this one lined up exactly, almost perfect, where it was like that first thing in the morning. And I've said this before, like when I'll do all day sits, say I'm doing it for almost a week straight, and you're, it starts to get just tiring, and my dad told me this before. He was like, why don't you sleep in a little bit and walk in at daylight and hunt? And I looked at it, I was like, I rarely have encounters at first light during the rut. Yep. Maybe an hour or so after it starts to kick up a little bit. And that data was spot on. Your data is the exact same as mine is with that, of that early time in the morning. You might have a few that are there, and it was like, that 8 to 9 AM time frame really jumped up, and then that 11 to 12, which I always love that time. And I learned that from hard experiences where I remember I was in college, or maybe I was in high school. I don't remember, one of the two, but it must have been high school, because I wasn't allowed to hunt in my dad's spots after high school. So he had told me, he was like, hey, go into this stand and sit. And he's like, but make sure you sit until afternoon. And I was like impatient, and it was like, 10:45 or whatever. And I text him, and I text him on my flip phone, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to get down. He's like, no, you got to stay. And I'm like, I can't. And it was like, I'm going to go till 11. And then it was like 10:55. I'm climbing down, and I'm like on the bottom stick, and, here comes a nice buck coming through. I'm like trying to grab my bow off the the rope that I pulled up to try to grab it, and obviously that didn't work out. But it was just like it was like, all right, having that experience. And it's just like I've shot, I think, 3 bucks at noon, like right around that noon time frame, and it's just and you typically see that those dead spots during that early afternoon, though. It seems like it kind of everything goes dead for a little bit and then starts to pick up, a few hours before dark then again. And you see that in that curve where it goes up and then and down. And I'll share that again just so you can see mine here, Matt.
Yeah. Incredible, to hear that it lines up so well, your data and mine, being different parts of the country, it just shows. I mean, that's the movement.
Yeah. So you can see like 8 to 9 was my highest period there. But if you look at the 4.5-year-old plus deer, that 10 to 11 time frame was pretty high in accordance with that, and then it kind of drops off in the early afternoon and then ramps back up before dark.
Yeah, your red bars are the real old age class.
Yep.
Yeah, interesting to see that tall red bar kind of right before sunset there too.
Yep.
Right before dark. That's interesting.
And I will say though, like the 6 to 7 p.m. one, that really only matters before daylight savings, at least in my part of the country, because then it's dark after that time anyways, so there's not really much data points for that on mine at least.
Well, that's a good point. I should have made that clarification too. I guess all my times are in pre-daylight savings change in November.
Okay, gotcha.
So I set my trail cameras in like September, with the pre-daylight savings, and I just let them run through the fall. And so so think about that. Depending on which side of daylight savings you're on in the fall, it might be an hour earlier or later, but
just sit all day. That's well, it's funny though that so what I did was I was Google searching when daylight savings were for each year, and then I would go and adjust the pictures back and forth, and man, I probably have a few off from me being confused on
I get confused we argue over daylight savings in camp every year about, I don't know, something about it messes with your head with the time you get up and anyways.
But then you see in October, and it's a complete, kind of opposite, where you see more of, at least this is my data, was more of that early in the morning, still not at first light, but in that within an hour, or so of daylight, and then it drops off in the middle of the day and then picks up really heavy, towards the evening. And I can't remember what December looks like. Yeah, pretty similar as well.
Yeah, almost indicative of more of that kind of bed to feed type movement in October and December. But then your November graph was more of you see that midday, late morning activity, accelerate, driven by the rut.
Well, yeah, and you think about when with deer, especially when they're moving between doe groups, it's they're best served to spend their energy once the does are laying down, to go check, versus them moving. What's the easiest way to find somebody is if they stay in the same spot versus if they're moving. And so I always think about that with some of the rut, funnel areas. It's that's why I've, at least it's either me being lazy as far as or getting tired and being convincing myself that I don't need to be there an hour before daylight every single day, or it's just I'm in my head, I create, it's okay, after the does lay down there, now the bucks are gonna go, cruising, kind of looking for them.
We've had similar conversations. I mean, a lot of the old timers in our camp, they'll go out right at daybreak or right in kind of that gray light, right before. And they are older, but it seems like none of us younger guys or people that are out there, under the stars for 45 minutes before the first, hint of light in the east. Seems like we're not seeing any more deer than them right away. I mean, maybe once every so many years, you pull the winning ticket, right away. But I kind of look at it the mental side of this is important in my mind, and you can get burned out fast. You can get frustrated really fast hunting the big woods, and it has happened to me. And your buddies in high deer density areas on the private land over food plots, they're sending you photos, and it can start to after 3 days, honestly, of not seeing a deer, and you can get frustrated and not, you start questioning, what am I doing up here? And I think if you can keep your mental game strong, meaning if that means you got to sleep in one morning and just relax and take a break, if you've been grinding for 3 days straight and not seeing anything, I don't think you're doing any harm or setting yourself back. If you sleep in one morning and go in at daybreak to kind of recharge your batteries a little bit, but you're out there for that key time during the day. If that's what it takes to keep your mental game strong, do it, in my opinion. And because I don't think you're missing much that first 45 minutes, hour of light, honestly.
Yeah, I this past season, I was going pretty hard for a couple weeks, and it came down to the last day that I was able to hunt, and I apparently was so tired that I missed my alarm, or I don't know, I had to have shut it off somehow. And all of a sudden I wake up, I have a driveway alarm that alerts anything coming up my driveway, and it goes off, and I like jump out of bed and I like see it as daylight, and I'm like freaking out, and I pull open the blinds and I can see out towards the driveway, and there's a nice 8-point buck chasing a doe around my front yard. And I was like, oh no, I was just like so upset, and he had like locked down with her like literally like 20 yards from my truck in the wood line. And so I was like, you know what? There's no rush at this point. I already, missed this. I made bacon and eggs and packed my gear up, got in my truck, and just drove away to go out to my hunting spot and not see any deer. But it was just like it was a reminder that as much as you want to grind it out and put in the work, and you do gotta work hard for these deer and be patient, but at the same time your batteries need recharged, and we're out there to have fun at the same point. So it's like trying to me it's like trying to find that balance, and it can be hard at sometimes, especially when you get in the mode of it to be able to do that. But how many times, I don't know if you've had this experience, but I've had it where I'll just get, basically I'm just a body in the tree, and I'm not being alert, and then I'm, miss an opportunity because I wasn't paying attention, or I was daydreaming, or I was on my phone, or whatever it is, and it's just like even in like I've even caught myself when I don't have phone service, just like looking at my phone for no reason, like going through like old photos or trail cam photos. It's like, what are you doing? You're out here to hunt, and I don't do it as often as I used to after getting burned a few times. But when you can keep yourself recharged, you can stay alert better.
Absolutely. I think you guys have similar terrain and territory as us, in that you're not going to get a long time to watch this thing coming in and take your time and get ready with your bow or with your gun. No. Your perfect shot. Like it looks, I've watched your videos and they're awesome, by the way. And
thank you.
Pretty heavy and thick cover. And so you might get one window where you got to grunt and stop them. And if you're not paying attention, it's the same for us. We have some shooting lanes, and it's thick cover, and if you're not alert and watching, he'll go right through that lane, and you may not even know it if you're looking down at your phone, or if you just see it too late and you yell or grunt to stop him way out there, it might just be the hind end you can see, So no, I think that's really important, and I would say you're better off. This is just my opinion, I guess, but I'm better off with a hard and alert 6 hours on stand multiple days than grinding so hard 3-4 days straight and burning yourself out and getting to the point where you get frustrated and then you go back to work or go do something else one day, and then you miss a key day. I think I would rather just try to take it easy, and like you said, you do have to grind, especially in these big woods, low deer density settings. You do have to grind in a sense, but you got to be smart about it, and don't burn yourself out so fast that it wrecks your season and then you miss your opportunity later. Just kind of keep that steady pace going and stick with it, and then you'll get that opportunity at a buck eventually.
Yeah, and I set up a lot like right on like at the head of a beaver pond, and you got flowing waters coming through, and it's almost like Chinese water torture where He's just hearing the creek all day long, just flowing, and you can't hear anything else. So you can't hear a deer coming. You're relying all on your sight, and then all of a sudden one appears, and you have a very quick time to be able to, potentially get a shot. Or, last year I had a camera guy with me, which filming in these settings is extremely difficult to actually try to film deer. But it was like, he was his first time here, and he was like, he hung his camera on like a strap over like a hanger, and I was like, hey, I'm not here to tell you what to do. You know what you're doing, but these opportunities are going to come really fast. I really don't believe that you're going to be able to get to your camera that time. He's like, oh, I'll be all right. I'm like, okay. And we had a buck came by, like literally like underneath the tree, like fast, and like came out of this old clear cut, and came busting out through, and then dove right back in. And he didn't even get to his camera. He's like, man, you were right. Like that happened fast. And I'm like, yeah, it's super tough, and that's where the alert side of it definitely comes into play.
Yeah, our rifles are on our lap, or leaned up, like if it's a 2-man ladder stand, like tipped up against the railing. So it's like it's right here. I mean, to your point, mm-hmm. I learned that the hard way when I was a lot younger. Hung my gun up on a hook on the tree behind me. And similar situation, buck came out. I went to go get my strap off. By the time I got back, he was gone and through the lane. And never hung a gun up since.
Well, it's funny. That was a lesson my dad taught me when I was young. Like when we would hunt out of tree stands, like he would say to me, he'd be like, with a bow, especially, he was like, all right, I'm like, oh, look, I got this, nice bow hanger. He's like, you can't have your bow on a hanger. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, because the opportunity to come so fast. So he would wear like these rubber boots, and he'd put the cam down in the boot. And so it would stay there without having his hands having to be holding onto the grip the whole time, but have it there so you could, just one quick movement, be able, or, one slow movement, be able to grab the bow and shoot, versus trying to turn around and, grab the bow off the hanger or whatever. And that was something that, he taught me when I was young. And now I hunt out of a saddle most of the time. So my bow, even when it is hanging, is only within 6 inches of reach to be able to grab it. But it's just, when it comes to gun hunting, I do not hang it by the strap at all. Cause like I'll lay it across me. I'll do whatever to make sure it is readily available, because like you said, those opportunities come pretty quick.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, cool, Matt. I appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking through all this stuff with me, and also just sharing your experience with your camp and just kind of your tradition and style of hunting and everything. Like I love hearing that from people, and love hearing that those traditions are still alive in a lot of places. And it's up to us as I'll call us the younger generation. We're in our 30s, but I still feel young, so to continue that tradition.
For sure, same. It's fun to hear the strong hunting tradition, like in your guys' state, and I know others, Wisconsin, the tradition's strong, and we'll keep it going here in northern Minnesota. Like you say, I think we got a little bit of a responsibility too, to try to bring as many people in as we can, and create opportunities for younger folks along the way. And man, deer season's right around the corner. It's not.
I know.
We're gonna be, we got bow season here in mid-September, and then we'll get the firearms out.
Oh, that's awesome, and hopefully, not complaining about the warm weather, but kind of, I'm ready for it to be a little bit cooler and have some of those cooler weather to be able to get out.
Same. Yeah, I've been shooting the bow, shooting my rifle, got a new gun this year, and I'm ready for a cool down though. That's for sure.
Nice.
Corner.
Yeah, for sure. And so everyone, I would highly recommend going to check out Matt's YouTube channel, Northern Forest Whitetail. Subscribe over there and check out his content. Does a really good job of explaining all this stuff like he did here, but even in more detail and a bunch of other topics. So head over and check that out. And is there anywhere else that anybody can follow along with your stuff?
I'm only on YouTube, so no other social media, and that's the place to find me if you want to check out those videos. Appreciate it, Beau. And yeah, it's been fun talking. I always like to connect with another big woods guy because there aren't that many of us, and it's just, when someone shares the same passion, it's kind of fun to speak to somebody who kind of understands the thrill and the allure of those kind of remote big wood settings.
100%, man. And yeah, like I said, thank you for coming on. I really do appreciate it.
You bet. Absolutely. We'll do it again sometime.
Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it with your buddies. Leave us a rating, a review, and subscribe. If you want to check out more content like this, there's plenty in the links below. We truly appreciate having you guys along with us.